on behalf of the Center for the Public Humanities and for the American Democracy Lecture this year. I'd especially like to welcome not only those of you that are seated here in this room, but we have many people watching by closed circuit, and we are very happy to have you here as well, and I'm sorry we could not fit everyone into this small space. I'd also like to thank just very briefly the very many people who've done a tremendous amount of extra effort to make sure this event exhibited a form of excellence that we try to achieve here at Messiah College. You will see many of them running around telling people what to do. You will not see some of them that have put in a lot of work, and so we really deeply appreciate those who work extremely well for us and do it without notice and without comment, because we could not do what we do without them. Just a few logistical details before we get started. In a few moments, I'll have Dr. Joseph Huffman, who's the director of the Center for the Public Humanities and a distinguished professor of history, come to the podium and begin the introductions. Dr. Piven will be introduced by Robin Lauerman, who is the chair of our politics department and associate dean for general education. Dr. Piven will then deliver her lecture, and we will have a Q&A session afterwards. A few notes about the question and answer session. During the Q&A, I will be calling on people. So if you just indicate that you'd like to ask a question and raise your hand, I will get around to as many of you as we can get to during the time that we have allotted. Because we're hosting guests on closed circuit, I will be repeating your questions. I'm not doing that to be strange. It's just so that they can hear what your questions actually are. We didn't want to try to run around a very crowded space and try to pass microphones around. So if you will realize that I'm going to then repeat your question, and Dr. Piven will frame her answer. We will ask that we allow students to ask the first several questions, but I will get again to as many of you, both in the Messiah community and the Harrisburg community at large, with your questions. We will end no later than 9:30, so if there are further questions, I apologize ahead of time, but we will stop at that point and end our event this evening. Final logistical note, as is usual at all college events regarding lectures and performances, we ask you turn off your cell phones and you refrain from recording the event, as is a college policy for all of our lectures and performances.
Actually, I haven't been to very many Christian colleges before, and they didn't know what to expect. Was it going to be something like Bob Jones University? I wondered. And you know, I've had a great day. It's really been a lovely day. I've met students and faculty from Messiah. I've listened. I've talked. And it's been just very lively, very good. I think I have a lot in common with a lot of the people in this room. And I think maybe we should talk more often. Tonight, I want to talk about what is actually one of my favorite topics. I want to talk about democracy in the United States. And I want to begin my talk by saying that I think that a belief in democracy, a passion for democracy, has been one of the great driving ideas of the modern historical era. What does it mean, democracy? I think in its broadest and richest sense, it means that the people, ordinary people, all of them, will rule over their communities. Now that's a very ambitious idea, a very grand idea, and nobody has actually understood how to translate that into specific institutional arrangements. And so the idea has been, in a way, shrunken, but it's still a brilliant idea. And this shrunken version says that democracy means that government must be accountable to the people. A little bit different than the people will rule. But even this shrunken idea has been so meaningful to people around the world has provoked so much passion and hope that it has led people everywhere to risk death in the struggle for democracy. As, Haitian peasants risked death at the hands of the Tonton Macoutes not very long ago in the election for Haitian president, or as indeed in this country, the freedmen from the South risked death in the years after Reconstruction because they believed so avidly in the idea that the government could be accountable to them too if they exercised the right to vote, which was about to be dishonored and taken away. So powerful is this idea that democracy means that the formidable power of the modern state, with all of its legal majesty, with its arsenal of weaponry, that power must be accountable to the people. So powerful is that idea that contemporary dictators always say that they are rulers over democracy. So I think it is the moving idea of the past few centuries. The question always is, how is that idea translated into institutional arrangements which will make government accountable to the people? And our answer to that second question, our answer in the United States and generally in the West, is that electoral representative institutions will force government, will force those who occupy positions of state authority to be accountable to the people. How is that done? Well, first, there is the right to vote, the franchise, which V.O. Key called the very core of a democracy. The franchise should be broadly, if not universally, extended to all adults living within the society. The franchise should be exercised at periodic contested elections. So there's the right to vote, the periodic contested election, then there are the rights, the Bill of Rights, actually, which allow people to exchange opinions, to organize, to assemble, so that the collective expression of their political sentiments is in a way developed, exchanged, congealed into the vote. Political parties are actually supposed to do that in the United States. And then there is, this is a tricky one, the requirement, I think, that officials who make important decisions exercising state authority, that they be exposed to the electorate. Because after all, you can have the universal vote, you can have fancy elections with drums and rum punch, and you can have rights to speak out, but if nobody has to step down when you vote against them, not so good. So state authorities have to be exposed to elections and to the electorate. And finally, I think if you have all of these things, including my final requirement, you have something that looks like a pretty good electoral representative system. The translation of those votes, the weighting of those votes in representation has to be approximately equal. In other words, it's not democratic. Everybody gets to vote, but your votes count much more than their votes. everybody has to be approximately equal in translating votes into influence on the exercise of state power. Now, I think that taken together, these arrangements are another brilliant idea for actualizing the democratic hope that the people, the state will be accountable to the people. But it's always the case that the institutional arrangements to realize democracy have been contested. Not everybody is in favor of democracy. And the fundamental reason is that democracy can pose a challenge to hierarchy in the society, especially to the hierarchy based on concentrated property. That's been true for 4 or 5 centuries, ever since the democratic idea emerged, ever since the levelers in England posed the challenge to landed property and royal authority. There is this famous, maybe a little bit apocryphal accounting of a dialogue that occurred between a colonel from the levelers' army and a General Ireton, who was Cromwell's son. And the Colonel Rainbow, challenged Ireton by saying, well, how can it be that we, who fought in this army and challenged the crown, how can it be that we will not have the vote in your new arrangements? And Ireton replied, if the poor man has the vote, no man of property can be secure. Because what will they do with the vote? The vote that controls those who have state authority? They will use it to redistribute property or redistribute status or redistribute other privileges. This has always been the underlying gnawing issue in challenges by Democrats or challenges of Democrats. It echoes through the centuries. It's a persistent issue. Democracy can pose a challenge to concentrated poverty. Well, during the tumultuous years of the American Revolution, something of this kind of challenge seemed to emerge. You know, the revolution has been characterized as initially a kind of contest between English commercial elites and American merchant and landed elites, a kind of colonial war, which we have seen in other places in the world. But the merchants and big landowners of the colonies of the United States could not fight a war on their own. There weren't that many of them. They didn't have the muscle or the muskets. And to make this a war, they needed the allegiance and the fighting power of the farmers and the craftsmen, of the ordinary people who lived in the colonies. And to secure their allegiance, their interest, their propaganda. We're susceptible to it, not through any fault of our own, I don't think. I think it's because we have very complex societies, very complex political economies. We're supposed to assess not only what is happening, what those people are doing up there, but whether it could be done differently, and whether that particular part of the financial regulation package is having that particular consequence in my hometown in Minnesota. I think we have a very big problem in untangling the workings of our complicated political economy in order to make judgments about it. That makes us susceptible to propaganda, to organized, moneyed efforts to tell us what causes what and who is to blame for that. That's a very dangerous situation, particularly when the propaganda is virtually organized like a machine, which has been true in the United States for the last 30, 40 years, with the rise of Fox News, for example, with the systematic intimidation of the mainstream media, calling them names, tarring them with the pinko name, for example. We're dependent on the media. How can you possibly figure out what's going on? You can't. You know, we have PhDs, and we're always trying to understand. So that makes you susceptible to propaganda. Or think about the Tea Party that arose. You know, it was a movement that arose over the last couple of years. It's a movement of people who are anxious. They're anxious partly because of demographic changes. They don't like the idea of a black president.
Boo.
That is not true. That is not true. That's not true.
They're anxious that the country... Are you all Tea Party?
We just have our eyes open.
But they also find the world hard to understand.
As long as he's following the Constitution, we don't care what color he is.
That would be when he follows the Constitution.
All right, I'm still doing the talking. Come on. You're going to get a chance in a minute. So, but my point is that it's hard for each of us on our own to assess what's going on in a very complicated country where much of what's going on is distant from us and much of it is really obscure, hard to understand. And that makes us rely a lot on people who purport to inform us, but could also be the vehicles for organized propaganda that equates, for example, the American ideal of freedom with economic license, or organized propaganda that tells us that every time we try to raise taxes on the really affluent, it's a job killer. Is it a job killer?
Yes.
Well, that's a question which has been subject to a lot of research. It can be answered with a lot of research, but it is also susceptible to screaming propaganda. And the propaganda has been mounted by corporate interests which have become very aggressive and very predatory. They become very aggressive and they become very successful because the tax burden in the United States has, over the last 40 or 50 years, been substantially shifted to those who can least afford to pay it, to working people. It's been shifted away from corporations and away from the rich. At the same time as our infrastructure needs money, our bridges, our roads need money. At the same time as our schools need money. At the same time as our clinics need money. Also, the safety net in the United States, which was the basic outlines of which were established in the 1930s. The programs which provide the unemployed with some benefits, which provide food stamps, for example, which provides pensions for the old, which provide health care for the poor or the old. Those programs have been under assault. environmental regulations have been moving. That's also part of an aggressive, predatory agenda by economic elites. And you know what happened? Also, they work to weaken financial regulations with the consequences that they set off a disastrous expansion of speculation, financial speculation, followed by steep recession. And that recession became the occasion for yet more aggressive demands by financial elites. They got bailouts. The banks got bailouts. A lot of corporations got bank bailouts. And their profits soared. They're doing just fine. But in the last 2 years, the median household in the United States has lost another 7% of its income just in the last 2 years. So, and the poverty rate is increasing. Now, in some ways, the period that we're in is familiar. Those of you who study American history will recognize the similarities between recent years and the Gilded Age of the 19th century, or the roaring 1920s, which were also years of speculative excess. But I worry also that there may be something new and very worrisome at work. And that is that we may now have an economic elite, particularly located in finance, which is unmoored from the society which nourished it, which is unmoored from our big corporations, which is unmoored from our communities, unmoored from our nation, which is so given to speculation that its horizons are very short-sighted. It lives on speculation, and it wants to gobble up the public sector on which ultimately it also depends. And that financial elite has seen the crisis of recession as an opportunity to escalate its demands. Well, under these conditions, I think we have to look to our history, search our history, and ask ourselves, well, in our troubled history, it's been a troubled history. We've reached for democracy, we've fallen short, but we've gone part of the way. We have to look at that history and search for where have the forces come which have restored both humanity and democracy sometimes in our country. And when I look at that history, I see the great movements of the populists and the progressives at the turn of the 20th century. I see the labor movement of the 1930s. I see the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s, movements that were enormously restorative of American possibility. They succeeded in partially reversing the predatory moves of America's ruling economic elites, and they sometimes succeeded in introducing important reforms into the electoral representative system, as when the civil rights movement actually won, realized the promises of what Lincoln called the new birth of freedom after the Civil War. Well, maybe there can be such a movement again. And maybe it's even now beginning in the main streets and squares of the United States, in the universities of the United States. There are demonstrations and marches. Postal workers are marching, for example. But what is also happening, it began small, are the Occupy Wall Street movement. You've heard of it. You've probably criticized it. Certainly, the mainstream media was full of ridicule for this movement, for the clothes that the young people wore and things like that. But, you know, the movement, actually, its clothes are something like your clothes if you actually go down there. The movement persisted. The movement targeted what is in a way the central symbol of this period in American political and economic development. It targeted finance. Finance has brought us a lot of trouble, and they are eating up most of the profits that are being. They also know that they have to be an inclusive movement, and they are inclusive. They call themselves the 99% to try to capture in a phrase their understanding that most of the wealth in this country is being gobbled up by a very tiny portion of the American people. This movement, no matter what you may hear, is fervently democratic, with its almost continual round of discussions. And it has a determination to be nonviolent, sometimes despite provocation. And it's spreading by now to 101 cities. I don't know if this movement will continue to grow or if it will succeed. There are no promises. But I, for one, hope it will grow, because I think our flawed democracy needs correction and that it can be corrected. Thank you.
Again, we're going to have question and answers for a bit here. We will stop by 9:30 if we haven't stopped before that point. So we will start. I want to try to call on the SCI students that are here for the first few questions, 3 or 4 questions, but we will open it up to the entire audience. So if there are students, SCI students present that would like to ask a question, Sari, you have your hand up.
I'm just wondering what you think of the push in the Pennsylvania legislature to change the way our electoral college system is run, and how do you think that's headed?
I don't know.
Could you repeat the question one more time, Sarah?
Wondering how the potential change to the Pennsylvania electoral college system ties in with what you were saying tonight.
The question for those that are on closed circuit is how the debate over changing the Pennsylvania electoral system fits in with the concerns that Dr. Piven's raised tonight.
Well, I worry that it could be a backward move. In general, I don't think we need an electoral college. I think we should have direct elections with majority rule. The electoral college idea that was created after the American Revolution was an attempt to place a kind of intervening body between the emerging mass electorate and the government. I don't think we need that. It has never served us well.
It has served us.
I have a question pertaining to your statement that you believe the Tea Party dislikes Barack Obama and the Tea Party stand. How would you react to their support of him?
How would I react to
The Tea Party support of him?
The question is, how does Dr. Piven react to the Tea Party support of Herman Cain, given concerns that she expressed about attitudes towards race and Barack Obama?
Well, Herman Cain is a long way from being president of the United States. Moreover, I think that what credibility he has is owed in large measure to the fact that he counters Barack Obama and he dilutes the suspicion that some of the animosity to Barack Obama is fed by a kind of racism. I want to put it more broadly, though. I think that, a lot of Americans are uneasy because, I said, the demography of the country is changing. By the year 2130, we will no longer be a majority white country. So it's not far away.
So what?
Well, I'm glad that you don't care, but I think that a lot of people are very uneasy about this. The
We
Tea
think that
Party
you
is
care
fed by
about that.
all different
What
kinds
studies?
of uneasiness and anxiety. It represents about 20 to 23% of the population.
Can you prove that everyone in the Tea Party is racist?
No, I didn't say that. I mean, a Tea Party is a movement. Do you believe it's a movement? A movement is fed by all kinds of springs, all sorts of currents of discontent. Not everybody in any movement is the same.
Again, I ask people to raise their hands to pose a question, please.
Right back here. Could you tell me the difference between a democracy and a republic?
Yes.
Ask a question, what is the difference between a democracy and a republic?
I am so taken aback by the fact that people, some people, not most people, but some people are announcing that they're no longer, that they don't think the United States is a democracy. This is
It's a republic.
to me.
It's a republic.
We're a republic. Well,
Article 4,
republic is a
Section
country
4.
that doesn't have a monarch.
Article 4,
It doesn't
Section 4.
say
I ask
anything.
people, please,
Doesn't-
Dr. Piven respond. Thank you.
Whether a country is a republic or not doesn't say anything about the ideas of about the fundamental rights of the members of political rights of the members of the society. When someone says we're a republic and we're not a democracy, they're challenging the idea that we are in some sense one people, equal and equally entitled to a share of influence on our government.
You had mentioned what I interpreted as kind of a hope in looking towards universities for growing movement. I would say that I observed more fervor, I guess, outside of the United States in protesting. And I guess my question is, what advice would you give us to grow that spirit if we do have a passion?
The question is, what advice would be given to grow a spirit for change? Would that be what you're saying? Okay. For the things that we believe in.
You should be active. You should join other people who also believe in those things, and you should speak up. I think that when you do that, when you link arms with other people, you join your efforts with other people, that spirit will grow.
Back over here.
Yes, you talked about the Occupy Wall Street movement. You said that you didn't know how if it was going to keep growing or stop. But besides that question, how do you think the opportunity for the Occupy Wall Street to bring back real reform is? How do you think that can happen, even if the Occupy Wall Street doesn't succeed? How do these people get together and bring about real reform in the financial system?
The question is, how can people actually create change in the financial system, and whether Occupy Wall Street can actually accomplish that?
Well, Occupy Wall Street, a great movement like the movement, the labor movement or the progressive movement, a great movement takes many forms. Occupy Wall Street own judgments and to resist simple conclusions foisted on them by the media. It's an impressive effort.
Back over here.
Yeah, so tonight you spoke a lot about major changes in American democracy, finding jobs, and you spoke a lot about poverty too. Now, in The Nation, you wrote an article called Mobilizing the Jobless, December 22nd, 2010, you said, an effective movement of the unemployed will look something like the strikes and riots that have spread across Greece in response to austerity measures forced on the Greek government by the European Union, or like the student protests that recently spread with lightning speed across England in response to the prospect of greatly increased fees. This kind of statement, it kind of sounds like a declaration of violence to me. Now, do you believe that we need violence, or that violence should be used to create change, or is there something else that you believe?
I don't think that that's a statement calling for violence.
Let me repeat the question.
Oh.
The question is.
I wish I had that.
The question is whether Dr. Piven believes that we have to have violence to create effective change for the kinds of things she's hoping for.
I believe in nonviolence. I think, though, that whenever a crowd assembles, and this was true of the American Revolution, you know, the revolutionary crowds were called mobs because they were mobs. That's how everybody understood them. That's what they looked like. Ben Franklin sitting in London looking out his hotel window, or was it an inn? Probably it was an inn. And he wrote about the English habit of mobbing. When people get together, when crowds get together, and they don't march in formation, they are a crowd, a mob. What are they doing? They are showing their numbers, their morale, and their righteousness. You think a riot means something different than that? A riot is what poor people do when they get together.
Well, the one thing you mentioned was where Greece property was destroyed, same deal in London. I mean, that's just what you said in your quote. I was looking for.
Well, I mean, I don't think that breaking a glass window is the worst crime in the world. I think that what happened, I'm against it, and I'm against it because you and other people will say violence, 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 and ignore the violence which is being responded to by the crowd on the street. And people are responding to the violence of losing their homes, to the violence of being jobless, to the violence of being hungry. And in Greece, they really are hungry.
I want to let one more student ask a question. I see some community members with your hands up, so I'll come back to you next time. Shoot.
I think throughout American history, a pretty strong case can be made that, at least during forming times of social activity, the general structure has been an elite structure ruling, trickling down their policies that seem to disenfranchise the poor. And it seems that academia has also tended to focus on this structure, power, focus perspective. And so I think many of us, actually most of us here, probably are very appreciative of your work about disruptive action and its calling for, the workings of the lower class and grassroots participants. And I'm especially appreciative of the fact that you qualify by saying that disruptive action oftentimes are nonviolent and are not really whatsoever. And so because of that, you talk about this idea of intermittent periods of time throughout American history where reform is brought about by disruptive action. I think many of us here would be interested to know if there can exist a possibility where reform and changes are made in a more continuous and constant way rather than a sporadic, intermittent period spout.
The question is whether change can be brought about in some kind of continuous process of reform instead of intermittent periods of disruption or upheaval.
Well, probably not the kinds of change that really change the distribution of power in the society. There are always changes. We have climate change. It's continuous. But the kinds of changes which involve the repositioning of large groups of the population in relation to the resources of the society, in relation to the status hierarchies of the society, that probably requires much more tumult and upheaval.
Can you go back? I see your hand over there. 2 fingers up. Yeah, 5 fingers up.
That's you.
Right there, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, great. My definition of democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. It's Article 4, Section 4 of the Federal Constitution that guarantees a Republican form of government to every state in the Union. So we don't have a democracy, and more accurately, we are a constitutional republic where the Congress is limited by the powers of Article 1, Section 8. And it prevents them from interfering in a totally free market of a totally free people, where the individual's life, liberty, and property are protected from the tyranny of the majority. And the new financial elite you speak of, it's not so new. It's the Federal Reserve. It's the granddaddy of all monopolistic corporations. How do you feel about the Federal Reserve and their position in defrauding us of all our property until we wake up homeless on the continent our fathers conquered?
The question is, what is Dr. Piven's understanding or attitude towards the Federal Reserve? Sorry, I shortened that a great deal.
Quite all right.
You shortened it a great deal.
The new financial
make it easier to answer because the questions pointed in different directions. But the Federal Reserve is a bankers' organization. It was created in 1913 to stabilize the financial system, and it is controlled by the big banks. It is not the only big bank in the world by any means. The Federal Reserve is connected to and related to big banks across the globe. So I don't want that kind of banking system. I'd like a banking system that was subject to more democratic control. But the beginning of your question was actually a sort of familiar bromide to me about you can't have a democracy because the sheep and the wolf thing. That people are too aggressive. Some people are too aggressive, so a democracy cannot survive. I think a democracy can potentially survive, but it requires eternal vigilance, and it especially needs our vigilance right now.
Yes, you speak of raising taxes on the wealthy to pay for schools, clinics, health care, etc. Now, that has been tried before in Russia, in Europe, where Russia's still recovering, Europe's going into a tailspin. China has the worst human rights in history, and I could speak in countless others. Now, they call this socialism. How do you define what you're defining as democracy? How is that different than socialism?
You know, I think it is.
The question is, what's the difference between radical democracy or democracy and socialism?
I don't know why you're looking to Russia or China or any of those distant and very different places for examples of countries with higher taxes. Actually, Russia didn't have higher taxes. They didn't have a tax system at all. But we had higher taxes in the United States. After the Second World War and through the 1950s, the marginal tax rate on the affluent 70% in the 1980s. But wasn't this America then? We had enough money to pay for our schools. We had enough money to pay to repair our roads. We had enough money so that the bridge outside Minneapolis didn't collapse. But so I don't understand what the question is. Our corporate tax rates were much, much higher. A lot of corporations, even General Electric, one of the most prosperous corporations in the United States, pays no taxes. We educate the people that work at General Electric. We provide the infrastructure. Why shouldn't General Electric share in the cost? I don't understand this.
Yeah, it's crony capitalism. Yes.
Again, I would ask, we're going to take one more question. I realize not everyone's getting your chance to ask your question. I encourage you to come back if you choose to the talkback session tomorrow. 4 o'clock, is that right, Joseph? 4 o'clock in Boyer 131 in this building. Woman back in the white that's got her hands straight up in the air has been trying to ask a question for a while, so I think we'll conclude with the last question.
If I have been understanding what you have said, one of the statements that you made was that the measure of a movement would be to have affected the electoral change, to have really impacted on that. And I would like to say thank you, because without acknowledging us, we have done that. The Tea Party has elected a number of people to Congress and to the Senate. So our movement, while it may not be spoken about in the same time frames and the same levels of these discussions, our movement is equally valid and has value, and we have made changes, and we will continue to make changes. I thank the college for allowing us to even attend. I find these dialogues interesting as well. I would like to thank everyone for being civil through all of it, even though we have dramatically different opinions. But again, I thank you for indirectly acknowledging our accomplishments.
That yes, I think the Tea Party is an authentic movement. It's certainly not my movement, but I am hopeful that it will, in short order, not be the only important movement in American society. Thank you.
Thank you.